Hey, what is going on, guys? In today's video, I want to do a controller settings guide for Fortnite Project Era Season 7. Now, right away, this is not meant to be a video of me telling you need to run my settings, because the truth is, bindings and sensitivity is highly subjective, so that's not really what this is about. This is more to give you a framework and kind of a logic to work around of how you can maybe decide to optimize your settings further. Let's get right into it, starting off with your base controller sensitivity. Now, in Season 6, I actually recommended to have a lower base sensitivity because with L2 spam being so strong in Season 6, particularly with the hand cannon, often what you'd be doing is you'd be hip firing, lining up that shot at long range, then tapping L2, getting that snap on, and hitting that shot at long range. But with Season 7, you may have seen my previous video, L2 spamming is a lot more inconsistent than it used to be, and I don't recommend you aggressively spam L2 like you used to. What does that mean? Well, maybe you could try out increasing your base sensitivity a little bit, because you're not going to be using the L2 trick as much. If you've already locked in the sensitivity for like a long time and you're comfortable with it, I don't necessarily recommend you change your sensitivity in that case. Like me, I've had the sensitivity locked in for almost 6 years now, so it doesn't really make sense for me to mess with that. But if you're not locked into it, it could be worth maybe increasing it just a touch for this season as the meta has changed. Now, targeting sensitivity. In the previous guide in Season 6, I basically said this really doesn't matter because L2 is so strong, you're not really going to be targeting for long periods of time. You're either going to be tapping L2 at long range to get that snap-on effect, or you might be spamming L2 really aggressively with an SMG or AR at close range. So you're not going to be holding L2 or holding aim down sights and firing for a long period of time if you want to use that L2 effect to its maximum. So last season it didn't really matter, but this season you're going to actually be holding L2 and firing a lot more because we've lost that crazy L2. What does that mean? Well, I would definitely take a little bit more time optimizing your targeting sensitivity. Of course, it's a multiplier of your base, so you have to multiply the two numbers together to get an effective targeting sensitivity. You definitely want it below 1.0, but it heavily depends on your base sense. So there's not really necessarily a right or wrong answer here, but I would definitely recommend at least a little bit of slowdown, probably 0.8 or lower, but you could even go higher if your base sensitivity is low enough, or you find that you're comfortable with a higher targeting sensitivity. Scope sensitivity, nothing's really changed since Season 6, so there's not a ton for me to say. Again, it's just a multiplier of your base sensitivity. You obviously probably want it lower than 1.0, but it's really personal preference and based on your other sensitivities, so I'm not going to make any concrete statements here. Now, building sensitivity, I actually have increased my build sense from 1.4 to 1.5. The reason why I've done that is because I've lost a little bit of ping this season. I've gone down from about 60 ping to 45 to 50 this season. What that means is I find a higher build sense a bit more reliable now, because if I spin in a circle, the builds will actually place instead of skipping, so I find it more useful to have a higher build sensitivity. I think, again, this will depend on your base sensitivity as it's a multiplier, but it will also depend on your ping. If you play on 150 ping, you probably can't afford more than like 1.2, 1.3, because builds are not going to place properly. But if you have 0 ping, well, you can set it as high as you're comfortable with because they're going to place no matter what. So it's going to depend on your ping and your base sense, but it might be something worth experimenting with if your ping has changed this season. In terms of the general settings, there's really 3 big ones I want to cover. Most of these are pretty obvious, like sprint by default, you obviously need that. Edit mode aim assist is one of those I want to cover. Edit mode aim assist I feel like can be useful, especially if you're new to editing, because it'll keep you in those boxes when editing walls, stairs, and cones, which is definitely nice. Or walls, floors, and cones. The problem with stairs is that with stairs, when you change the orientation of your stair, you need to cross through the middle. And in the middle, there's this empty block where there's no edit piece, and when you try and cross through that, you're going to kind of get stuck. And it's very frustrating and makes editing stairs very clunky. So it's something worth experimenting with, but I don't personally use it. I used to use it, now I don't. If you're new to editing, I probably recommend you give it a try, but if you're getting more advanced, it might be something to turn off, but again, you're probably just going to have to try it and figure out if it works for you. The other thing is build a pro, build immediately. You absolutely need this on. What this does is, say you're building walls and you want to switch to stairs, you press the stair button once and it starts placing stairs. If you have this off, you have to place it twice, so that's a huge disadvantage. There's really no reason to have this off. You really need this on. Finally, vibration. Vibration is, I don't think it's really going to help you in any way. It's just going to make your controller shake, which I don't see as any sort of advantage. But if it makes the game more fun to you or you're used to it, maybe you could leave it on. But I would recommend experimenting with it off. It may help you, But if it makes the game less fun, then leave it on, because ultimately having fun is the most important thing. Okay, let's move on to the binds. So, before we go over the logic of how I've set up my binds, I quickly want to take note that place marker does actually work this season. So you can use that button to place your marker, which will put it both on the map as well as the giant light beam in the sky, which can be helpful to direct your teammates to something you see. So just something that might be worth binding. Now let's talk about why I have my core functions, pickaxe, edit, switch mode, and reload, on the D-pad, which seems incredibly weird. The reason why is because I play with a 4-paddle setup, where all 4 of my paddles are bound to the D-pad. What that means is that secondary functions like place marker, inventory, and map are bound to the face buttons, which I find easier to hit than the D-pad. The D-pad itself I never touch because of the 4 paddles, but this will only really work if you have a 4-paddle setup. If you play claw, for instance, you're probably going to want to move all these essential binds over here back to the right on the face buttons. And if you play a standard setup with no claw and no paddles, you're going to want your key functions also probably on the face buttons. One thing to remember is that with left stick by default, I believe this is sprint by default. I would highly recommend you rebind this to a core function like jump, edit, switch mode, reload, something important, right? Because this is a button that you don't have to take your thumb off the stick to press. It's pretty easy to hit, and I think the most common bind here is edit, so it might be something worth trying. If you still have this on sprint, I highly recommend you try out moving another function to that. But please note, you're probably going to need to give it about a week because it's going to take a while to relearn that muscle memory. Another thing is on the right stick, by default, this is crouch/repair. I don't recommend you have crouch/repair. Here's why. If you have crouch/repair, the game has to check if you're holding the button or tapping the button. What that means is that it's basically going to be crouch on release, because when you push the button, it's still checking, are you repairing or are you crouching? But only when you release the button will it confirm the crouch. However, if you have repair unbound from this, as soon as you press the button, it's going to put you into crouch, which is significantly faster. Is it the biggest advantage? Probably not, but it's something worth trying. It may make your game a lot more responsive, and honestly, repair, you could probably get away with unbinding this, but if you need it, you can always bind it to another button. You're probably not going to use it that often. Okay, moving on to the build. The same logic sort of applies, right? The crouch button. I believe this is rotate by default. Honestly, you realistically probably don't ever need to rotate. Like, you used to use this really old Fortnite, like going down, but you could probably just waterfall, so I highly recommend you get rid of rotate. And I also recommend you get rid of some unnecessary buttons. The game is going to try and give you useless crap like squad comms or emote. You don't need emote in build mode. If you want to emote, just go back to regular mode. All that does is creating opportunities for you to press the wrong button. So I really recommend you get rid of that unnecessary stuff. The other thing is I've noticed that traps actually do place now consistently on controller, which is a nice thing to have. So that's just something to keep in mind. And then finally, edit mode. Again, is going to try and give you unnecessary binds. So, like unbind, squad comms, emote/replay, replay last emote. All this stuff is useless. You don't need to emote in edit mode, right? Again, the crouch logic still applies. You want crouch instead of crouch/repair. And one other thing is you can run a double edit bind where you set your edit button and confirm button to different buttons because we don't have edit on release. That can be faster if you're good with it. I'm not the fastest editor, but it might be a slight advantage to something that could help you out. So something maybe worth trying, but not the biggest deal. Let's talk about dead zones now. Now, our traditional logic for dead zones would be to set them as low as possible to where you don't have stick drift. So for me, that would be 0.18, 0.18, because that gives you the maximum amount of travel that your stick has as actual usable input, right? But I also hear some people say, you know, I actually want to have a higher dead zone than before, which logically seems weird, but if it works for you, it works for you, because maybe it stops you if you accidentally touch the stick just a little bit, it won't move. It'll take a little bit more to move it just a little bit, so that might help your long range aim just a little bit. So it's something if you are used to, you could do, but if you want just a baseline, what should I do with my dead zones by default, I would set them all the way to the minimum, and then slowly crank them up until you don't have stick drift anymore. But again, if you want to try out higher dead zones because it'll maybe help your long range aim a little bit, you could try it out. So, thank you for watching this video, everybody. I hope this helps you, and I'll see you in the next Gamer Coach video.